My husband looked me dead in the eye and said, "If you can't trust me spending every single weekend with my ex-wife, then maybe, just maybe, we shouldn't be together at all." The anger flared, but beneath it, a chilling calm settled. Because what he didn't realize, what he couldn't possibly have known, was that I'd been waiting for that exact permission. It was 5:47 a.m., and the glowing screen of Colton's phone lit up our darkened bedroom like a neon sign, burning the words into my consciousness. "Can't wait to see you today. It's been too long. D." My hands trembled as I carefully placed his phone back, exactly where I found it. Daisy, his ex-wife, the woman he'd been meeting every Sunday for 3 months, insisting it was just innocent coffee between old friends. But D was clearly counting down the hours until she saw my husband again. I slid back into our Egyptian cotton sheets, my heart pounding, forcing myself to pretend to be asleep while my mind raced. Who sends messages that early unless they've been thinking about someone all night? I held my breath, trying to keep it steady as Colton stirred beside me. His hand, as if on autopilot, reached for his phone like it was life support. The soft glow illuminated his face as he read the reply, and a slow, private smile spread across his features. A smile I hadn't seen directed at me, or anything we shared in months. He typed back quickly, his fingers moving with a practiced familiarity that churned my stomach. The response was brief, but his expression, his whole demeanor, screamed that it was loaded with a meaning I wasn't meant to understand. "Morning, beautiful," he murmured, his voice carrying that fake cheerfulness people adopt when they're hiding something big. He leaned over, a perfunctory kiss on my forehead, and I caught the telltale whiff of his expensive cologne. At 6 a.m., for Sunday coffee with a friend. I mumbled something non-committal, rolling over, giving him the space he clearly needed to continue his elaborate performance. Through the dresser mirror, I watched him select his outfit with the kind of meticulous care usually reserved for a first date. The cashmere sweater I'd bought him for Christmas. The designer jeans that cost more than most people's monthly rent. Everything coordinated to look effortlessly expensive. This was our Sunday routine now. My husband's ritual. It all started 3 months earlier. Daisy Morrison, his ex-wife, sent a casual text announcing her return to London. "My ex-wife is back in town. May grab coffee to catch up." Colton had shown it to me, eyes wide, as if it were the most innocent thing. Such simple words, yet they would systematically dismantle our marriage, one weekend at a time. I remember that first Sunday. Colton had dressed normally then, just weekend casual. He came back a couple of hours later, full of animated stories about Daisy's photography career in New York, her struggles readjusting to London, how she needed his guidance navigating the competitive art world. I watched him, listening while organizing her bookshelf. The way his eyes lit up, the passion in his voice when he spoke of her creative vision, it gnawed at me. "Maybe we should have her over for dinner?" I suggested, testing the waters. I'd love to meet her properly. His enthusiasm vanished, just like that, replaced by that carefully neutral expression he used during difficult client negotiations. "She's very private right now, going through a difficult transition. Maybe once she's more settled." That should have been my first real warning. In 4 years of marriage, Colton had never been protective of anyone's privacy but his own. But I wanted to trust him. I trusted the man who'd promised me forever in front of 200 witnesses, the partner who'd built this beautiful life with me, brick by expensive brick. Our Georgian townhouse in Richmond, featured in design magazines. My thriving marketing consultancy. His corner office overlooking the Thames. We were the couple everyone envied, the ones who had cracked the code on having it all. So, I pushed those warning bells aside. I ignored the escalating frequency of their meetings, their lengthening duration, the late-night phone calls that sent him scurrying out to the garden for privacy. I even ignored my own gut when those calls started interrupting our dinner conversations. Colton would apologize, then step outside to help Daisy with some urgent professional crisis that always seemed to coincide with our limited time together. Now, as the shower started running, I knew I had 20 minutes. 20 minutes before he emerged, perfectly groomed, ready for another day in his alternate reality. 20 minutes to lie there, pretending I didn't know what I knew. Pretending I hadn't seen the credit card charges from expensive shortage restaurants. Pretending I hadn't noticed how our weekend plans always got canceled for Daisy's emergencies. Pretending I hadn't started sleeping in the guest room because listening to his muffled late-night conversations with her made me feel physically sick. My phone buzzed on the nightstand. An email from my company's London office. Marked urgent. The subject line made my stomach flip. European Division Director. Final consideration. Time sensitive. I deleted it without opening it, just like the previous two offers. A substantial annual salary to head their European division. My own team. Unlimited creative control. A chance to build something entirely my own. But accepting would mean dismantling our perfect Richmond life. Abandoning the beautiful existence Colton and I had supposedly constructed. Except, our life wasn't perfect anymore, was it? It was a meticulously maintained illusion, like a movie set that looks real from the front, but reveals nothing but scaffolding and paint from behind. The water stopped running. I heard him humming, actually humming, while preparing for his weekly betrayal. The sound made my chest seize with a familiar, suffocating combination of fury and heartbreak. I dragged myself out of bed and into the kitchen, needing the simple ritual of making coffee to ground me in something real. The morning light poured through our custom Italian curtains, hitting the marble countertops we'd painstakingly chosen. Everything in this room screamed of partnership, of shared dreams. The espresso machine we'd bought in Tuscany. The dining table where we'd hosted countless dinner parties. The kitchen island where we'd planned vacations and imagined children. Now, it all felt like evidence of a crime, proof of what I was losing to a woman who wore vintage band t-shirts and made artistic poverty look effortlessly chic. Colton appeared in the doorway, freshly showered and perfectly groomed. That expensive cologne again, the one he claimed was a client gift, but never wore for actual client meetings. His hair was styled with a precision usually reserved for a photo shoot. "Coffee smells amazing," he said, kissing my cheek with lips that tasted of aggressive mouthwash. "You're up early for Sunday." I wanted to scream about the text, to demand to know why his ex-wife was counting down hours until she saw him. Instead, I handed him his coffee in the mug I'd bought him last Christmas, the one that said "World's Best Husband" in elegant script. The irony was a bitter taste in my mouth. "Another crisis with Daisy?" I asked, keeping my voice carefully neutral. He nodded, already checking his phone. "Gallery politics. You know how complicated the art world can be." I didn't. Actually, neither did he, until 3 months ago when he'd apparently become an expert in creative industry navigation. But I just nodded, playing my part in our little charade. He left 20 minutes later, a quick kiss that felt more like an apology and a promise to be back by dinner. I watched from the window as he walked to his car, noticing the spring in his step, the one he used to reserve for our date nights. The car disappeared, carrying my husband toward whatever fantasy he'd constructed with the woman who used to share his name. 2 weeks later, the changes in Colton's Sunday preparations escalated. It started with the cologne. Then, the Hermes shirt I'd bought him, missing from our closet. Special occasion? I commented, folding laundry. He'd paused, fingers fiddling with his watch clasp. "Just coffee with Daisy. You know, networking." The art world is so image-conscious. As if his ex-wife's professional network demanded he dress for a gallery opening just to grab coffee. The transformation was unsettling. His face hardened. "Don't be ridiculous, Paige. Adults can be friends with their exes without it meaning anything." Ridiculous. That word hit me hard. In 4 years of marriage, he'd never called my concerns ridiculous. Misguided, maybe. Overthinking, certainly. But never ridiculous, like I was some jealous teenager imagining problems that didn't exist. The word hung between us, thick and acrid, like smoke from fire we were both pretending not to smell. My best friend Sarah, over an overpriced salad, told me I was being insecure. She insisted it was beautiful they could maintain a friendship, a sign of emotional evolution. Her condescending smile stung. "Paige, sweetie, if you can't trust your husband to have coffee with an old friend, maybe the problem isn't him." I left feeling worse, her words echoing in my head. Maybe the problem isn't him. Maybe I was just insecure. Maybe this is what a mature relationship looked like. By the way, if you're still with me on this wild ride, please hit that subscribe button. You won't miss the other unbelievable stories I've got coming. Then came James, my business partner of 5 years. He saw the tension in my shoulders, the distraction in my eyes. "Everything all right at home?" he asked. I found myself pouring out Colton's Sunday routine, the elaborate preparations, the vague excuses. James listened, his expression growing more serious. When I finished, he didn't offer advice, just raised his eyebrows in that way. I knew meant he thought something made no logical sense. "Interesting," he said, his silence speaking volumes. Later, as we packed up, he mentioned, almost casually, saw Colton last Sunday. That new place in Shoreditch? Exposed brick, 20-pound steaks. My fingers froze on the keyboard. Shoreditch? He said they were getting coffee in Richmond. James's face became carefully neutral. Maybe they changed plans. He was with a woman, brunette, artsy looking. They seemed. He paused. Looked like they were on a date. The words hit me like cold water. He'd lied about where he was, and they were on a date. October brought longer Sunday meetings and new development, the late-night calls. Usually around 10 p.m. Colton's phone would buzz, his demeanor would shift. "Sorry, it's Daisy. Client emergency." He'd step out to the garden, leaving me alone, listening to his animated conversation drifting through the French doors. His tone was different during these calls. Warmer, more engaged. I started timing them. 20 minutes, 30, 45. He even laughed. Genuine, delighted laughter that made me realize I couldn't remember the last time he'd laughed like that with me. When he returned, he'd offer vague apologies and even vaguer explanations. Gallery politics, client negotiations, industry connections. Daisy was fragile, apparently. Needed emotional support to navigate London's art scene. As if a woman who'd built a successful photography career in New York suddenly needed my husband's constant guidance for basic professional situations. I started sleeping in the guest room. I told myself it was because his late-night calls kept me awake. But the truth was, lying next to him while he prioritized another woman's needs over ours felt like a special kind of torture I couldn't endure every night. From the guest room, I could still hear his voice, softer, more intimate. Reassurances about her talent, encouragement about her prospects, promises that things would get better. I couldn't remember the last time he'd spoken to me with that kind of gentle certainty. The guest room became both my sanctuary and my prison. 3 weeks into my self-imposed exile, I discovered the dark magic of 2 a.m. social media stalking. Daisy Morrison's Instagram profile loaded with cruel efficiency. No privacy settings. Her feed was artfully arranged chaos. Vintage band t-shirts, gallery openings, coffee cups shot from deep artistic contemplation. But it was the locations that made my blood run cold. Richmond Farmers Market. Tagged 14 days ago. The same Sunday Colton claimed they were meeting for coffee. I recognized the vendor stalls, the cobblestone, the Victorian lampposts where Colton and I had shopped together for 4 years. Our favorite antique shop on Hill Reese. 6 days ago. Hidden treasures in unexpected places. The same display case where we'd found the Art Deco mirror in our hallway. He wasn't just meeting her. He was touring my life, documenting places that belonged to us. Each photo felt like a systematic claiming of spaces I thought were ours alone. And her photography was beautiful. Seeing my life through her artistic lens made me feel ordinary, like I'd been living in black and white while she saw everything in vivid color. The monthly ritual of organizing our finances arrived. I spread bank statements across the dining table, looking for the familiar patterns of our predictable life. Instead, I found evidence of her. Existence threaded through our accounts like foreign DNA. 180 pounds for dinner at a Shoreditch restaurant called Lou Bernardine on a Sunday when Colton claimed they grabbed sandwiches. Saatchi Gallery admission for 2. Purchased the same afternoon, he claimed they walked through Richmond Park discussing her career. Most damning of all, charges from the Ned's lobby bar in central London, last Sunday, when he swore they had a quick coffee before he came home early because Daisy was overwhelmed. The numbers don't lie. I photographed each suspicious charge, building a digital case file I wasn't sure I wanted to prosecute. When Colton came home that evening, I spread the statements in front of him like cards in a poker game. "Expensive coffee dates," I said, pointing to the Shoreditch charge. His reaction was immediate and smooth. Too smooth. Like he'd been practicing. That wasn't coffee. We met some gallery owners Daisy knows from New York. Networking dinner. You know how important connections are in creative industries. He spun another elaborate fiction for the gallery admission, then a creative story about meeting a client at the Ned for the hotel bar charge. Each lie built on the last, creating an increasingly complex narrative. His voice carried the confidence of someone who'd refined these explanations until they sounded not just plausible, but reasonable. I started questioning my own sanity. Maybe Sarah was right. Maybe I was seeing conspiracies where simple friendship existed. Saturday morning laundry became an archaeological expedition. Colton's favorite leather jacket, the navy wool scarf from Paris, missing. Dry cleaners, he mumbled from behind his newspaper. But our cleaners, who knew us by name, said they hadn't seen them in over a month. Small things disappearing at first, then larger absences. Pieces of our marriage vanishing. That afternoon, planting tulip bulbs in our front garden, Mrs. Patterson, our 70-something neighbor, called over the hedge. She'd seen Colton last Sunday. "Your husband's got good taste in walking routes," she chirped. "Richmond Park is beautiful this time of year. Lovely day for a romantic stroll." Romantic. That word hit me. "He was alone?" I asked. Her friendly demeanor clouded. "Well, no, dear. He was with a woman. Brunette, quite pretty in that artistic way. They were walking hand in hand, looking very much like a couple." She described Daisy perfectly. The vintage clothing, the camera, the way she leaned into him. My neighbor, with no agenda, had just provided eyewitness testimony that my husband and his ex-wife were behaving like lovers, not old friends catching up over innocent coffee. The tulip bulbs lay buried like secrets, waiting for spring to reveal what I'd known all along. Then came the earrings. Thursday evening, Daisy's Instagram story popped up. A gallery opening in Shoreditch. And there she was, wearing my grandmother's vintage pearl earrings. The ones that had been in my family since 1952, passed down through generations. The ones Colton had borrowed last month for an important client event that required elegant accessories. I zoomed in until the screen pixelated. No mistaking them. While I ate dinner alone, believing he was working late on year-end budgets, he was watching his ex-wife wear my family heirlooms at art openings in neighborhoods he'd never taken me to explore. I screenshotted everything, my fingers shaking, adding it to the growing folder of evidence I'd labeled documentation, because calling it what it truly was felt too devastating to acknowledge. The photo joined bank statements, Instagram posts, and timeline discrepancies in a digital archive of betrayal that grew heavier each day. By Friday morning, the earrings were back in my jewelry box. But touching them felt different now, contaminated by the knowledge of where they'd been, whose skin they'd touched. And then the lifeline. My boss called. "Paige, we want you to launch our entire European division. Your own team, unlimited creative control." The salary figure made me sit down. £160,000 annually, relocation assistance, equity options. The kind of opportunity people build entire careers hoping to encounter. Handed to me, precisely when I needed an escape route from a life I'd been desperately trying to save. Colton came home that evening, practically glowing from another successful day of supporting Daisy's emotional well-being. I didn't mention the call. The silence felt intentional. Powerful. My first real secret in 4 years of marriage, built on supposed transparency. He moved through our kitchen, dicing vegetables, his face animated as he described Daisy's latest breakthrough. The same enthusiasm he used to reserve for my professional victories. Then came October 15th, our 4th wedding anniversary. A gray, bitter day, matching my mood perfectly. I woke up alone in the guest room, having spent another night listening to Colton's muffled phone calls through the walls. No flowers on the kitchen counter. No card by the coffee maker. No acknowledgement that this day held any meaning beyond being another Sunday in his carefully structured routine of emotional infidelity. Colton emerged from our bedroom, already dressed for another day with Daisy, wearing the watch I'd given him for our first anniversary, the cologne that now reeked of betrayal. When I tentatively mentioned the date, he looked genuinely surprised. Not guilty, not apologetic, but utterly confused. Like I'd referenced some obscure holiday he'd never heard of. Our anniversary, I repeated, wondering if he'd remember without prompting. Recognition dawned slowly, followed by that particular expression men were when they realize they've forgotten something significant. Oh, of course. I'm so sorry. I've been so distracted with work lately. We'll celebrate properly tonight, I promise. Dinner at that place you love. But the damage was done. He was so deeply invested in his fantasy life with his ex-wife that he'd forgotten the actual anniversary of his actual marriage. The day we stood before God and everyone we knew, promising to prioritize each other above all else. Don't worry about it, I said, and for the first time, I truly meant it. I'm sure Daisy needs you today. He kissed my forehead, a touch devoid of warmth, before disappearing into his alternate reality. I spent the day alone in our house, surrounded by wedding photos that now felt like evidence of a crime I hadn't known was being committed. The albums told a story of two people who believed they'd found something permanent. Young faces full of hope, hands clasped like we'd never let go, eyes that saw futures we were sure we'd share. Looking at those photos now was like examining artifact from civilization that no longer existed. That Sunday evening, I dialed James's number. Colton was still extending his anniversary celebration with Daisy into its 7th hour. We met an all-night diner in Putney, the kind of place that served coffee strong enough to fuel difficult conversations under fluorescent lights that made everyone look tired and honest. I spread my phone across the Formica table like evidence in a courtroom. Screenshots, bank statements, timelines, even voice memos I'd secretly recorded, documenting Colton's shifting explanations. James examined each piece with the methodical attention he brought to client presentations. When I finished, a case built from months of systematic deception, he looked up from my phone, his expression grim. "You know what this is, don't you?" he asked quietly. I nodded. I couldn't say the word affair out loud yet, but hearing James confirm my worst fears validated months of intuition I'd been told to ignore in the name of trust and emotional maturity. The fluorescent hummed overhead. London continued its bustling life, while mine transformed into something unrecognizable, something that would demand choices I never imagined having to make. "What are you going to do?" James asked, his voice neutral. I stared at Daisy's gallery opening photo on my phone, my grandmother's earrings glinting. I didn't know yet, but that wasn't entirely true. Deep down, a plan was already forming. Not revenge, not exactly, but self-preservation disguised as strategy. The months between October and February blurred into a strange parallel existence. I kept working, meeting clients, building campaigns for others' dreams, while my own slowly decomposed. Colton maintained his Sunday rituals, his late-night calls, his increasingly elaborate explanations. We were polite strangers sharing a house, bills, and nothing else that mattered. He stopped apologizing. I stopped asking. I stopped pretending to believe him. The London offer, my lifeline, still hovered in my inbox. 3 times, my boss called for an answer. 3 times, I asked for more time, knowing I was waiting for Colton to give me permission to leave. February arrived, gray and bitter, matching my mood. I was in the kitchen at 7 a.m., reviewing meaningless client proposals. Footsteps on the stairs announced Colton. Not his usual weekend casual descent. These steps had purpose, precision, the cadence of someone preparing for a performance. He emerged, looking like he was headed to a magazine shoot, not coffee with a friend in emotional crisis. The cashmere sweater I'd given him, dark jeans, hairstyle with products I'd never seen him touch in 4 years of marriage. Another emergency situation with Daisy? I asked, not looking up. Gallery politics, he said, adjusting his watch. She's having trouble with a difficult gallery owner, questioning her artistic vision. Needs someone who understands the business side of creative industries, right? Because overnight, my husband had become an expert in art world negotiations. I watched him check his reflection, adjusting his collar. The man looking back at him was someone I barely recognized. Not my husband, but a carefully constructed persona designed to appeal to someone else's aesthetic. "Stay home with me instead," I suggested, closing my laptop with deliberate calm. "We could drive to Bath, find that antique market you mentioned." His reaction was immediate and visceral. His face transformed from casual preparation to active irritation. "I can't abandon her when she needs support." Abandon. The word hung heavy. Leaving his ex-wife alone for one Sunday was abandonment. Cruel. Thoughtless. But leaving his actual wife alone every weekend for 4 months straight was just maintaining healthy adult friendships. The irony was a live wire. What about what I need? The question came out quieter than I intended, but it carried enough weight to make him pause. For a moment, I thought he might actually consider it. Remember, he had a wife who'd become invisible. Acknowledge my patience. But his face hardened, taking on the cold, calculating expression he used during hostile business negotiations. "We've discussed this exhaustively, Paige. Daisy and I are friends. Adults can maintain platonic relationships with their exes without it meaning anything inappropriate." He paused, studying my expression with analytical precision. "Actually," he continued, his voice taking on the measured cadence of someone delivering a prepared statement, "if you can't trust me spending every weekend with my ex-wife, maybe we shouldn't be together at all." The silence stretched infinite, like that moment between lightning and thunder when the whole world holds its breath. I heard the neighbor's dog bark, the distant rumble of Sunday morning traffic. But mostly, I heard the sound of 4 years of carefully constructed life finally cracking, splitting along fault lines that had been developing for months without either of us acknowledging the structural damage. He'd given me an ultimatum disguised as a choice: accept his relationship with Daisy or end our marriage. Trust him completely or lose him entirely. Submit to his version of reality or face the consequences of questioning it. What he didn't realize was that he'd also given me permission. Permission to end this charade with my dignity intact. I looked him dead in the eyes, truly seeing him for the first time in months. The man standing in our hallway, wearing clothes I'd bought him, cologne he saved for another woman, hairstyled for someone who wasn't his wife. This wasn't my husband anymore. This was someone wearing my husband's face, living in my house, draining my emotional energy, while giving his authentic self to someone else entirely. "You're absolutely right," I said, my voice carrying a calm that visibly startled us both. His face cycled through a fascinating series of emotions. Confusion, first, like a computer processing conflicting data. Then alarm, as he realized this wasn't the script he'd written. He'd expected tears, accusations, maybe a dramatic scene he could later recount to Daisy, proof of my emotional instability and his justified need for support. What he hadn't expected was agreement. Calm, rational, immediate agreement. "Wait," he stammered, his confident negotiation stance faltering. "That's not. We should talk about this." "We just did," I replied, gathering my laptop and client files with the calm efficiency of someone who'd finally stopped fighting the inevitable. "You were very clear about your priorities." He followed me upstairs, his footsteps quick and uncertain. I could feel him watching as I moved around our bedroom. Our former bedroom, collecting the work materials I need for what was about to become the most important Sunday of my professional life. "Paige, wait. I didn't mean we should actually separate. I was just trying to explain how important it is for you to trust me." Trust. That word had been weaponized against me for months, used to make me question my instincts and ignore obvious evidence. Now it sounded hollow, meaningless, like calling rain dry or darkness bright. "I do trust you," I said, pulling my laptop charger from the wall. "I trust you to prioritize Daisy over everything else. I trust you to lie about where you go and what you do. I trust you to forget our anniversary while remembering every detail of her gallery openings." He opened his mouth to protest, but I continued before he could construct another elaborate fiction. "And most importantly, I trust that you meant exactly what you said downstairs. If I can't accept your relationship with your ex-wife, we shouldn't be together. So we won't be." I left him standing in our bedroom doorway and headed to my home office, the room that was about to become my war room for executing the most important strategic decision of my life. The London email sat in my inbox like a door I'd been afraid to open, afraid of what might lie beyond the familiar confines of Richmond, of routine, of a marriage that felt safe even while it was suffocating me. But safety is an illusion when you're drowning slowly. And I've been underwater for so long, I've forgotten what breathing felt like. My fingers hovered over the keyboard for only a moment. Then muscle memory took over, typing words that felt like they were coming from some stronger, clearer version of myself I hadn't met in years. Subject: London Division Director Position Acceptance. I'm ready to accept the role. When can we discuss transition logistics and start dates? Thank you for your patience with my decision-making process. I'm excited about this opportunity. I hit send before I could second-guess myself, before the part of my brain trained to prioritize other people's comfort over my own advancement could interfere. The response came faster than I expected. Within 4 hours, even on a Sunday evening. Brilliant news. Can you start in 3 weeks? We'll handle all relocation logistics. Welcome to the London team. We've been hoping you'd say yes. 3 weeks. 21 days. To dismantle a life I'd spent 4 years building and reconstructed in a city where nobody knew my history. Where I could be someone other than the wife who wasn't enough to keep her husband's attention. Downstairs, I heard Colton on the phone, probably calling Daisy to describe his domestic crisis. His voice carried the same animated tone that used to be reserved for discussions about our future. Monday morning arrived with the predictable sound of Colton attempting damage control. His footsteps on the stairs were heavier than usual, weighed down by the kind of regret that only surfaces after consequences become visible. He appeared in the kitchen, that particular sheepish yet defensive expression men get when they realize they've overplayed their hand. About yesterday, he began adjusting his cufflinks with nervous precision. I think we both said things we didn't mean. Heat of the moment, you know. We've been under a lot of stress lately. Stress. As if external circumstances forced him to prioritize his ex-wife over our marriage. As if spending every weekend with another woman was something that happened to him, rather than something he chose repeatedly. Which part didn't you mean? I asked, my voice carrying the calm interest of someone observing a fascinating psychological experiment. The part where I agreed with your assessment of our relationship, or the part where I accepted that we shouldn't be together. He ran a hand through his hair, the same gesture he used during difficult client presentations when the numbers didn't support his narrative. You know what I meant, Paige. You were being... He stopped himself, probably remembering how well ridiculous worked out yesterday. I was being what, Colton? Emotional? Reactive? This whole thing with Daisy has me seeing problems that don't exist. The audacity was breathtaking. 4 months of systematic deception, forgotten anniversaries, missing jewelry, and financial infidelity. And I was the one creating problems by noticing them. I signed the transfer papers, I said simply, watching his face process the information like a computer running too many programs simultaneously. The kitchen fell completely silent, except for our espresso machine's gentle hum and the sound of Colton's carefully constructed world beginning to crumble. What transfer papers? London. The director position. The one I've been offered 3 times. The one worth nearly double my current salary. I start in 3 weeks. His coffee cup hit the marble counter with a sharp crack, sending brown liquid splattering like abstract art. He stared at me like I'd announced plans to join a space mission. You can't be serious. We never discussed this. You can't just make unilateral decisions about our future. The hypocrisy was so perfect, I almost laughed. The same man who'd been making unilateral decisions about our weekends for months, conducting a relationship with his ex-wife, without consulting me about the impact on our marriage, was suddenly concerned about collaborative decision-making. Actually, I can, I replied, wiping up the spilled coffee with paper towels that felt symbolically like cleaning up messes that weren't originally mine. Especially when you've made it clear that our future isn't really a priority. It looks like Daisy's career concerns, Daisy's emotional needs, and Daisy's social calendar have been significantly more important than anything involving your actual wife. He started to protest, but I continued before he could launch into another elaborate explanation about professional friendships and mature ex-relationships. The house goes on the market Friday. I added, because there was no point in drawing out revelations that would be devastating regardless of timing. The blood drained from his face so quickly I worried he might faint. You can't sell our house. It's our home. It's where we've built our life together. It's my house, I corrected gently. The mortgage, the deed, the down payment, all in my name alone. I bought it 6 months before we got married, remember? You just helped choose the furnishings. The financial reality settled over him like a physical weight. I can't afford anything comparable on my own, he admitted, his voice small, a way I hadn't heard since his father's business failed during our second year of marriage. I know, I said, meaning it without cruelty. But that's not my problem anymore. The man standing in my kitchen, in my house, wearing clothes I'd bought him, suddenly looked like someone I was seeing clearly for the first time. Not the partner I thought I'd married, but someone who'd been living in my space, spending my emotional energy, taking advantage of my investment in our shared future, while pursuing his own interests with someone else entirely. 3 weeks suddenly felt like both too much time and not nearly enough to extract myself from 4 years of entangled finances, shared possessions, and the elaborate infrastructure of a marriage that was apparently much more important to me than to him. But for the first time in months, I felt something that resembled excitement rather than dread when I thought about what came next. The days blurred into boxes, legal paperwork, and a strange intimacy of dividing shared possessions with someone who had become a stranger. Colton moved through our house like a ghost, occasionally attempting conversations that felt more like negotiations than genuine communication. The morning of my departure arrived, gray and drizzling, London weather that somehow felt appropriate for endings. I was sealing the last of my boxes when the doorbell rang with a persistence that couldn't wait. James. He stood there, that look I recognized from our most difficult client meetings. The look he wore when he'd discovered something significant that no one would want to hear. "We need to talk," he said, stepping into my hallway. "Before you leave, there's something you should see." He set his laptop on our dining room table, the same table where Colton and I used to plan dinner parties. I was running social media analytics for that gallery client. James began, fingers moving across the keyboard. Daisy Morrison's name came up, so I did some deeper research. What I found changes everything. The screen filled with screenshots, timestamps, social media posts. The Sunday brunches, James said, clicking through images. They weren't emergency counseling sessions at local cafes. Look at these locations. The photos told a different story than any Colton had ever shared. Sketch. Chiltern Firehouse. The River Cafe. Places you go to impress, to create memories. She's been documenting everything, James continued. Not just meals, but activities. The apartment hunting photos. My stomach turned. Specific listings in Richmond, within walking distance of our house. Neighborhoods where she could easily become part of our daily routine. Places where running into us would feel natural. But the most devastating evidence was her professional portfolio. An entire photography series titled New Beginnings. It was developing parallel to her relationship with my husband. The images loaded with artistic precision that made their emotional impact brutal. Our favorite pub, the White Swan. The antique shops on Hillrise. Even the Richmond Farmers Market. Each image dated. This isn't casual documentation, James said. This is someone deliberately creating a visual record of replacing another woman's life, one location at a time. The photography was beautiful, yes, but the context made every artistic choice feel like violence. Every carefully framed shot, evidence of a calculated invasion. There's more, James said, his voice getting quieter. The timeline doesn't match anything Colton told you. Weekend trips to Bath, the same trip I'd suggested multiple times, which Colton had dismissed as impractical. The evidence spans months, James concluded. Not just infidelity, but an elaborate campaign of manipulation. While Colton was telling me about Daisy's fragility, she was documenting their romance like a victory lap. "She's been planning this whole thing," I whispered, scrolling through images of increasing intimacy. This wasn't accidental emotional reconnection. This was systematic. James nodded, closing the laptop. I'm sorry, Paige. I know this makes everything worse. But he was wrong. It didn't make everything worse. It made everything clear. For months I questioned my instincts. Let Sarah's lectures convince me my concerns were signs of inadequacy. Now I understood. My instincts weren't just correct, they were conservative. The situation was far worse than I'd imagined, more calculated than my worst suspicions. 2 hours later, I was at Heathrow. The morning's revelations felt like the final pieces of a puzzle I hadn't realized I'd been solving, completing a picture that explained not just what happened, but why every attempt to fix our marriage had been doomed from the start. You can't repair something when one person is systematically dismantling it while pretending to help with maintenance. My phone buzzed. A text from Colton. What are you doing this weekend? The question carried assumptions that would have been accurate a week ago, that I'd be regretting my hasty decision, feeling overwhelmed. Instead, I looked around the departure lounge, filled with people heading toward new adventures, new possibilities. For the first time in months, I felt excitement, not dread. I took a selfie against the departure boards. Paris, Amsterdam, Rome, and at the top, London. My boarding pass visible. A genuine smile, replacing months of forced cheerfulness. Start of my new life, I typed, adding the photo, hitting send. The response was immediate. Wait, you're actually leaving? Come home. We can work this out. But I was already boarding. My phone switched to airplane mode. London. My London. It waited ahead. Richmond shrank behind me, a problem I used to have. The plane lifted off, carrying me away from 4 years of carefully constructed lies and toward a future that was finally, irrevocably mine. The plane touched down at Heathrow with a gentle bump of new beginnings meeting solid ground. London spread out beneath gray skies that somehow looked more promising than Richmond's familiar sunshine ever did. I was 32, carrying 2 suitcases and a laptop bag that contained everything I needed to build a life that belonged entirely to me. My Shoreditch flat exceeded every expectation. Exposed brick, industrial lighting, floor-to-ceiling windows framing the city skyline. My first morning, I stood at those windows with coffee from the artisan roastery below, watching London wake up. The coffee tasted different here. Not just the beans. Wondering where my husband spent yesterday, without analyzing text for hidden meanings, without that constant, low-level anxiety that had become so normal I'd forgotten what peace felt like. My new team in Canary Wharf was hungry, innovative, eager to prove themselves. Within 2 weeks, I'd implemented 3 strategies that increased client retention by 30%. The success felt different than my Richmond achievements. Not just professional validation, but proof that I could build something meaningful when I wasn't constantly managing someone else's emotional crisis. For the first time in months, I went entire days without compulsively checking my phone, without wondering if the person who claimed to love me was lying to my face. Back in Richmond, according to mutual friends who couldn't resist sharing updates, my departure created exactly the kind of chaos I'd hoped to avoid, but secretly knew was inevitable. Colton's carefully managed double life imploded spectacularly. Sarah, my former lunch companion, proved surprisingly eager to share details about the aftermath of my strategic withdrawal. Daisy expected a completely different outcome, she told me during one of her calls that felt more like entertainment than genuine concern. She thought the Sunday sessions were courtship, that Colton was building toward leaving you for her. The irony was perfect. By preemptively ending the triangle, Daisy found herself in the awkward position of being the other woman in a relationship that no longer existed. Her response, according to Sarah's breathless reporting, was swift and artistically devastating. The New Beginnings photography series, which had documented her systematic replacement of my life, was updated with a new collection, False Start. Black and white images of empty restaurant tables, abandoned coffee cups, solitary figures in locations that had once represented possibility, but now spoke only of betrayal and miscalculation. The artistic statement was clear. She'd been played just as thoroughly as I had. cast as the romantic heroine in a story where the male protagonist had never actually committed to anything beyond ego gratification and weekend entertainment. The Richmond house sold within 6 weeks. The Georgian townhouse, featured in design magazines, purchased by a young couple who probably imagined they'd build the kind of lasting partnership Colton and I had pretended to create. The proceeds, after paying off my mortgage, gave me a financial freedom that made London feel less like an escape and more like an investment in my actual future. 6 months into my new life, I received an unexpected LinkedIn message. Daisy Morrison. She requested a private meeting, her message carefully worded, devoid of artistic flair. We met at a cafe in Covent Garden, neutral territory. She looked smaller than I'd imagined, more fragile than the confident bohemian goddess I'd constructed in my mind. The exhaustion in her eyes spoke of the weariness that comes from realizing you've been cast as the villain in someone else's story without understanding the script. I wanted to apologize, she said, without preamble, her hands wrapped around a coffee cup like it was anchoring her. For everything. For believing things that weren't true. For participating in something that hurt you. For not asking the right questions. She paused, staring into her cup. Colton told me your marriage was essentially over. That you were just going through the motions until it was convenient to divorce. That you'd grown apart and were staying together for financial reasons. The audacity was breathtaking. But I found myself feeling something unexpected. Pity rather than anger. And you believed him? I asked. I wanted to, she admitted, with the kind of honesty that only comes after consequences make denial impossible. It made everything easier to justify. The restaurant dates, the photography project, the apartment hunting in your neighborhood. If your marriage was already dead, then I wasn't really destroying anything. The conversation lasted 2 hours, 2 women dissecting the elaborate fiction one man had constructed to serve his ego, while keeping both of us invested in competing versions of the same fantasy. Colton had played both sides masterfully, painting me as controlling and suspicious to her, while portraying her as needy and fragile to me. I've been where you were, she said as we prepared to leave. The wife wondering why her husband needs so much friendship from his exes. It's devastating, and I helped do that to you. As our conversation ended, she delivered the perfect coda to what I'm finally comfortable calling my revenge story, though revenge implies more active malice than what actually happened. He's completely alone now, she said, gathering her vintage leather jacket with movements that suggested someone who'd learned to carry disappointment with artistic grace. He's renting some dreary flat in Clapham, spending weekends watching Netflix instead of curating relationships with women who don't really know him. The irony was so perfect, it felt scripted. Colton, who'd been so desperate for female attention that he'd maintained relationships with both his wife and ex-wife simultaneously, now had neither. The man who needed constant validation from multiple sources to feel interesting had discovered what it's like to be genuinely alone with himself. Walking back to my Shoreditch flat, through streets lined with galleries and cafes that define my new life, I realized something profound had shifted in how I understood what happened. I wasn't angry anymore. Anger requires ongoing emotional investment in someone else's choices, and I'd redirected that energy toward building something that actually served my interests. Instead, I was grateful. Grateful that Colton was arrogant enough to deliver that ultimatum. Grateful that he underestimated my willingness to call his bluff. Grateful that he freed me from a marriage that was slowly suffocating everything authentic about who I used to be. Sometimes, people do you the greatest favor of your life by showing you exactly who they are. Colton showed me he was someone who would choose drama over stability, ego gratification over partnership, manipulation over honest communication. And in showing me who he really was, he also revealed who I could become. Someone who refuses to accept less than she deserves. Someone who chooses herself when others won't. Someone who finally learned that you can't save a relationship with someone who's already emotionally left. Every morning, when I wake up in my warehouse flat, watching London come alive outside my windows, I remember that moment in our Richmond kitchen when everything changed. The moment I stopped fighting for someone who wasn't fighting for us and started fighting for myself instead, I finally chose myself, and it was the best decision I've ever made. So, tell me, if you were in my shoes, at what point would you have finally given up on a relationship like this? What would have been your breaking point? Let me know in the comments below.